I want to shift gears and talk about another client of ours who's actually going to be here on the show with us today, James Hayward from Jane's Defense Weekly. James was the interim CFO during a transformation that we helped him with at Jane's Defense Weekly. It's an organization based out of the UK, and our UK office delivered the work that we did with him. So, James, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Look forward to chatting. Yeah, let's go.
Absolutely. So we're here talking about Jane's Defense Group, which is a client that we've worked with you on there in the UK. What can you tell us about Jane's Defense Group? What do they do? What's the scope of, how big they are? Maybe just give us a little bit of overview of the company.
Okay, so Jane's is a fascinating business. It started in 1898 when there was a General Jane who identified and used to draw pictures of naval ships. And the idea was that he would use these pictures to actually send out to military commanders so they could identify the profiles of ships on the horizon and identify them as enemy ships. And since then it has grown into what is called open source intelligence provider. And it provides information which is, by its definition, publicly available, mainly via the internet nowadays, on everything to do with intelligence, to do with the security, aerospace, defense industry around the world. Its major customers are the US government, is probably its biggest customer, and all the agencies that sit within it, the Five Eyes, NATO. But there's also, there's Japanese, I think we sold to, 95 countries around the world. And it's a fascinating insight into what you can glean from open source as to how you can provide that intelligence to the security and aerospace industries. It's a really, really high regarded business. And it was actually a privilege to be involved with them.
That's really interesting. It's not the everyday company that you come across.
No, it's not. It's the type of thing which, actually, you often see in the newspapers, accreditation to Jane's or whatever, as they will identify a tank which has been used in Syria or a tank that's been used on the Ukraine border, and actually it may well be a Jane's intelligence. Or sorry, somebody who works for Jane's. They're not intelligence officers. It's not classified at all, but they're experts in their field who can recognize the markings of a tank and say, well, that's a certain brigade that belongs there, and therefore that is part of the Russian infantry of, whichever. And from there, they can glean all sorts of information. It's all, as I said, it's all open source. There's nothing classified, but it's extraordinary. I've actually sat the open source intelligence course, or the introductory course, what you can glean from the internet and from knowledge. So they've got a hell of a reputation, and they were owned by IHS Markit, which is a huge conglomerate with 15,000 employees. It's just announced a merger. I can't quite remember whom with, but a very, very well regarded company. But there's 15,000 employees in IHS Markit. Jane's has got about 350 employees, and they were considered to be, not core to the IHS business. So they were put up for sale just over a year and a half ago. Highly profitable business, a very, very good one, but just not core to IHS's strategic vision. So they put up for sale, and they were bought by a private equity outfit just this time last year, just over a year ago.
Okay. So Jane's is a client of Third Stage, and you were involved with Jane's prior to our involvement, and you were brought in as interim CFO. Why were you brought in, and what were some of the major challenges you faced when you first came on board at Jane's?
So I was brought in because Jane's was part of a big corporate. When it was sold, they essentially transferred the business of Jane's, if I can call it that, the assets, everything to do with the business of Jane's was transferred. It was a division within the transport division of IHS. So they transferred the assets of Jane's, or the business of Jane's, into a new legal entity. That was effectively it. It was the front end of Jane's. It was everything to do with the commercial side of Jane's. As a corporate part of IHS market, there was not one single back office function that was transferred. There was no finance, there was no HR, there was no legal, there was no admin, there was no IT, there was no corporate structure at all other than the front end. So it was vanilla. They got the business and everything that the business delivered, but actually nothing to support it in terms of its whole infrastructure. So literally, there was one finance person came across who was an FP&A lady girl who was brilliant, absolutely central. That was the only back office person who came across. Nobody else at all. So we literally started with a blank slate. So I was interim CFO. Well, between the two of us, we were the whole finance department, supported by sort of like run-off agreements with IHS Market to support us in the transformation period. And that's exactly what happened. So I was brought in because I've worked in many companies, and I've as an interim, as a support to help companies. So I've seen what hopefully good structures look like, and I think that's part of what it was about. Was it's not me knowing the answers; it's probably more about me knowing the questions to ask. And so I was brought in by the private equity house to help that transformation from being part of a large corporate to part of a standalone within a private equity environment. So hopefully that answers the question. And actually, just to lay the scene there, so the corporate IHS, very well run, really good business, had the absolute classic ERP setup. It had SAP, it had Workday, it had Salesforce, and it had Concur. And I'm doing a similar job at the moment, and it's exactly the same setup. Completely different organization, but it's very similar. So it's a pretty well tested route, SAP, Workday, Concur, Salesforce. So none of this came across, should I say, as part of the transaction at all. So we started with a blank slate, which gives you an opportunity.
Right. So that's really interesting. And that's one of the interesting things about carve outs is I think a lot of times when people think about a transformation, they think about I've got my back office in place. It may be a mess and I need to improve it, but I at least have something there. Whereas what you're saying is you guys were sort of forced to stand up that back office and some of those internal processes and the things that were part of the larger entity.
Yeah, and actually both have their advantages. One of them is you start with a blank slate, which is what we had in James. So we literally start with a blank slate, but you've got to build it up, and you've got actually nobody there to build it up with. So you literally have to build. It's not just buying in that one. It's not just getting the ERP system, commissioning it. It's actually educating, training people. Whereas, and I have done this, is go and fix it in businesses where you actually have a starting point, but it's just not working well. So both of them have their challenges and their advantages. Interestingly enough, one of the things that came out of the Jane's transformation was because we had nobody there. One of the things we actually got a little bit wrong is not quite the right word, because you're never going to get everything right, and we'll touch upon this later in the talk, I'm sure. But one of the things which I subsequently found, because I've handed over to a permanent replacement now, is that once you've gone live, because there were no staff there, no back office staff there at all. They didn't have any of the experience or the trade. Well, they did have some training, but the real training, the on the ground training, and you need more of that in a situation where you're doing a carve out with absolutely zero backup at all. Whereas a business which is transforming, you've got a back office there. Actually you will have staff there who know how the business works, who understand the mechanics and the flow of the business. Whereas in this situation, we started with a blank slate. So a little bit more training, and you can't beat real live, transactional training for these types of situations. It's just one of the challenges.
Right. Yeah. So So how long of a time frame are we talking about here? From the time you were brought in until you actually had a semi-working back office function, what kind of duration were we talking?
So I came in about a month before the transaction finally closed, and then we had a target to try and migrate across about an 11-month period, Salesforce, Workday, Concur, and SAP. So we did Salesforce, Workday earlier, Concur and SAP all became part of NetSuite, which is what we went across to. And so the whole thing has taken, I think they've just about got off their what's called TSAs, transactional service agreements. So the whole thing took about a year, and that was tight, and took a huge amount of investment in a program management office, and a lot of planning. So we did the whole thing in a year. Um, and I've heard anecdotally of people who it's been a lot longer. I don't think I've heard many examples where it's ever been shorter than that. You might be able to shorten it by a month or 2 months, but these things take a lot of time, and a lot of investment in resource. So it's just over 1 year in. I now know that they are working and functioning properly, on their new ERP system. I think all the ERP systems are now functioning properly. I mean, it's never a perfect world, and we'll come on to that, but it's worked.
Right. So what are some of the in that year timeline, which is fairly aggressive? If you think about all the things that must have gone into that, it's not just technology. Obviously, you're also talking about standing up the business processes and the team and all that stuff. But what are some of the biggest challenges you faced when going through this transformation?
Well, for a start, we had no staff at all. I mean,
That's a problem.
literally, apart from you've got the what I call the front of house staff, the sales guys, the guys providing the content in the case of James, because it's open source intelligence, the CEO, the senior leadership team, and they are great, but they've been part of a corporate which has got many thousands of people. And actually, what is very apparent is there's a huge amount of implicit support that goes into those structures, which people don't really realize they've got until it actually disappears. Um, it's something which you wouldn't even explicitly think about until somebody takes it away. So part of it was about a culture change which happened over a period of time, on making people realize that they were no longer supported by the mothership, as I would call it. There's a whole decision making process. You're no longer going up through layers and layers and layers of management to get decisions. Guess what? Private equity world, you can make decisions within days, within very very quickly. If something's got to be done, it's got to be done. Recruitment was clearly a big challenge, and we spent a lot of time and a lot of investment into making sure we could recruit. We recruited about 90 people, of which probably more than half were in what I would call the back office functions. So that recruitment process started, really immediately the deal was signed, if not actually before the deal was finally completed, because you've got to get these people on board, and it just takes time. You want top quality people, and you're going to have to take 3 months to recruit and 3 months for them to work out their contracts. And before you know it, you're 6 to 8 to 9 months into your year. So that's a huge part of it. And we actually took on board a lot of interims. We set up program management offices, which was absolutely key. And I think I'll touch upon that later on. But having specialists who know what they're doing just gives you that peace of mind that actually your decisions are hopefully being formed in the context of people who understand the consequences and also the challenges that you're facing.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So it's on the surface, it sounds like you had to stand up some technology and some systems, but when you really dig underneath that, there's a lot more to it, obviously, with the processes and the hiring and the people, the culture, all that good stuff.
It's only people who make decisions. It's only people who do things. All these systems, I mean, they're all good, whether it's your NetSuite, your Dynamics, your SAP, your Oracle, whatever, they're all good systems. I mean, they're all mainstream, and some are more appropriate for different businesses. So the only thing that's probably going to let you down is actually people.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
Only
Well
people who
said.
drive machines. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have good people but great technology, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good.
It's a very bad mix.
Yeah. But you said something that was really interesting in the midst of all that. You talked about culture, and you mentioned that there's a cultural change or a cultural shift that you had to enable as part of this transformation. Maybe help us understand that. What was that cultural shift? How did you go about it? What was that all about?
It's simply the fact that you're taking an organisation, and particularly a management team, who've been part of a very, I mean, it's not a rigid hierarchy. It was a great company on reflection, but you're dealing with a company that had 15,000 people in, and to run a 15,000 person business. And I'm actually dealing with one now, which has got a 60,000, which was 60,000 people. To run an organisation like that, you actually have to have quite a sophisticated but quite a rigid structure for the decision making process to work up and down. And actually, the materiality of information is completely different. So a business that's turning over, into the billions has got a completely different materiality level compared to one which is being carved out, sold to private equity. It turns over, into the tens of millions or hundreds of millions or whatever it is. So what was important to the group under, corporate ownership, what was not important to the group in terms of, variances to performance is really important to a PE house. Yeah. So, and actually the ability to make a decision, you're not spending, oh God, this recruitment profile has been out there for 6 months. We haven't got anybody. If you want to get out and get somebody, recruit somebody, you go through the right channels and you get a decision within a day. So, right, go for it. Get on and do it. And some of it is it's a liberation of thought. We're all perfectly capable of doing it. But if you spent, the last 10 years working in an environment where every time you ask for a decision, you're not going to hear back for a month, 2 months, or whatever, or ever, or that actually your performance, nobody really cares about the £100,000, issue here, and then you go to an environment which is completely different, whereby the £100,000 is material, and actually, if you want to recruit somebody and they're important to the business, then damn well get on and do it. And so in a way, you're liberating people from the shackles of a corporate environment. And both environments are right, but they're different. So the big corporate culture was making sure that people understood that the journey they were going to go on was going to be different to the journey that they've been on. And most people actually embrace that type of change, but it does require, you can't just force the horse to water to drink. You've just got to allow it to slowly, well, not slowly, but you've got to urge it and push it along a little bit, but accept that actually they're coming from a different place, and hopefully they'll all embrace it. Not everybody ever does. I mean, that's, some people like the steadiness of the massive corporate, but that is a massive cultural change when you stand back and look at it for a lot of
Right.
people.
In addition to the cultural nuances and components, and that's very interesting, by the way. Just what a dramatic shift that must be. I think a lot of times companies, when they think about culture, if they think about culture, they're thinking more incremental changes and things that might be a little bit more measured. Whereas, just given the situation here, it was more of a 180 in some ways. It sounds like in terms of how that culture changed.
I mean, to go from a corporate background to a part of 15,000 people to one where you're standalone with only 350 people,
Right.
that is a dramatic shift in positioning and temperament, whatever.
Yeah. So, in addition to culture, when you think about PE-owned firms, and I know you've worked for and been involved with
Yeah.
transformations at PE-owned firms and then just more corporate, non-PE-owned firms, how is it different going through a transformation in general for a company that's got private equity investors and maybe think of things a little bit differently?
Well, probably the most important thing to take into account is that the time horizon of the average PE investment, not all of them, but most of them, is 5 years. So, they come in, um, they really make their impact within the first year, 2 years, grow the business, and then look to exit by year 5. So by the end of year 4, I mean, their eyes are always on the exit. That's what they do. But by the end of year 4, they really are focusing in on the exit. So your time horizon within those businesses is, it is, shall I say, quite structured. 5 years, and therefore you know what you're going to be doing in the first couple of years, and at the end of the fourth year, you know what you're going to be doing. So it's really quite a structured approach, but it's quite definitive. I mean, one might argue that actually within the quoted sector world, the time horizons are in a way horrendous because you get judged on quarterly results. So people might have the ability within the quoted world to, or not the ability within the quoted world to say, well, actually, hell, if we don't deliver our results this quarter or the next quarter, we're all up for the high jump, and God help us all. Whereas in the private equity world, you could either say it's a short term or it's a long term play, because you say, well, actually, I know that I'm not going to get shot for missing my results for a month or for a quarter or for a half year. I will get shot, and I will be held to account if I don't deliver. But at least I've got an audience who will listen to me. So, they have their advantages. The decision-making process, I think, and I touched on this earlier, within private equity is much more agile. You're much closer to the board. That you're not part of a group, each of whom is competing for capital. You're part of a company that they've invested in, and they've invested in because they've got a vision for it. So the vision, their strategy, and your enablement of that strategy should be perfectly aligned. You're not competing with other divisions within a corporate, and therefore the decision-making process should be much, much quicker. You virtually can ring them up and say, this is what we want to do. You put your case, and you can get a decision. If it's a decision that goes up to the board level, you can get a decision within the week. And so they're much more. I think they've probably also got a slightly more risk culture, provided it sits in with their strategy for the business. So it is a fundamentally different dynamic that drives the PE structure. And listen, I'm not speaking for all PE houses, so I'm just talking broadly. That is a very, very different approach to how they manage the businesses, and it's liberating in some respects, but you'll also have your feet held to the fire in others. You can get away with it in big corporates. You can get away with some poor performance or whatever. They may just focus on your revenue, not your bottom line.
Right.
So,
yeah, and liberating is usually not the word that I associate with transformation. So it's good to hear that some of your experience has been liberating in that way, where you're able to see or affect a change that has helped make the companies more nimble or more responsive, whatever the case may be.
well, I'd certainly say that I think there's a lot of cases of people who want to do things but feel hidebound by the slowness, the glacial decision making that happens in corporates. That we need to do this, but whereas they understand the importance of it, the people who actually make the decisions don't understand the importance, so they're not part of it. They're not close to it. Whereas the private equity owners will be much, much closer to the company. So I think it's liberating, because once people understand and realize that actually there's an alignment of interest for their company, they're not competing with other divisions. They may be competing with other strategies. That actually it's something which that you can all point in the same direction a lot, and hopefully move forward a lot more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all of your experience with transformations at different companies, maybe I'll focus just on Jane's, and if you have other examples, those may apply as well. But what would you consider the most important components of a successful transformation? Are there a handful of things that sort of jump out at you based on your experience at Jane's as well as with other companies?
Yeah, there are. Um, I I've spent a lifetime actually helping companies, many of them which have been distressed. And one of the things which has always hit me is there's a massive relationship between failure and governance. And it's not a subject which people really like to talk about because it's a bit dull or whatever. But I've seen where governance is poor, results are poor. And whilst that can apply to, should I say, the whole corporate, if I look at a transformation project, if you don't get your governance right, you're setting yourself up to fail. It is just a mirror image of the larger problem which I've just discussed, which I've just mentioned, which is if you get poor governance in a company, then you're setting yourself up to fail. If you get poor governance on a transformation project, you're setting yourself up to fail. God's sake, get the governance right so that the reporting and everything about it is correct. Because if it's not, you'll all end up fighting. You'll all blame each other, and the whole thing will go, up in smoke. And the results from that just do not bear thinking about. So get your governance right. Preparation. I don't know how many times I could say it. Prepare. But invest it all up front. Do your preparation, and then everything else should actually flow from that. Setting up a program management office, really important. And invest properly in that. Don't think you're going to save some costs just by not investing in a program management office, because if you don't invest, you're kidding yourself, and you'll regret it. Most people, when they go through a transformation program, have probably never experienced it. Maybe some people, most people might experience once in their life. That does not mean that you know what to do at all. So just accept the fact that actually going from A to B, and it's something you've never done before, you might have done once, is something you should probably ask experts to help you with. Because if you get an expert who's done it 30 times, he will go straight to the nub of the problem way before you. And just because you're competent in an area doesn't mean that you're capable of getting it right the first time. And I'm sure, the second time you do it, you go, oh gosh, I'm that much further up the curve because I know exactly what to do. And the third time you do it, you're really a long way up the curve. So if you get somebody who's done it 20, 25 times, trust me, he's going to take you from A to B without going round the bloody houses at all, and knows how everything fits. So to me, you just don't kid yourself that you've got the experience to do it. Negotiating contracts with the likes of Oracle and Microsoft and AWS, the chances are, yes, you may be very good at negotiating contracts, but you have no idea what type of terms and conditions they're giving to other people. So whilst you may walk away thinking I think I've got a great deal, unless you've actually dealt with lots of contracts with these guys, you've got an absolutely asymmetric view on life. And therefore, don't think for yourself, don't think for one moment that you actually have the skill, the capacity, the capability to know whether you've even driven a good contract. And it's a contract that's fair. It's not just about money. It's about making sure the whole thing works for you. I would never profess ever to knowing anything about anything like this. I would just simply, I think that the job of somebody in my position is to ask the questions, not to answer them. I'm not experienced enough to say this is the right thing to do. I'm hopefully experienced enough to be able to say, I have no idea what is the right thing to do. I need some help. Building contingency, because it's never going to be as cheap as you think, and it's never going to deliver everything you think in the first instance. So manage people's expectations. Don't think that you've got a magic wand when you make a decision. The hardest part of the journey starts not when you've said we're going to transform. The hardest part comes when you actually say we're doing it now. We're actually delivering it. Making the decision to transform is easy. Actually delivering it is where it's really, really important. Last thing is, I say last, I'm sure we could go on for hours, but recruit early. Don't think, well, the system's going to go live in October, therefore we'll recruit in September. You know, it's a that is a real short-term saving for some. It's not a clever one. Just recruit early, get people, and just invest in training people and get them engaged as early as possible. Because it gets the cost of I'll touch on this, the cost of failure of a transformation. Sit down and ask yourself, what is going to happen if I can no longer invoice people? What's going to happen to my working capital? What's going to happen if I can't get my results out to the public if it's a quoted business? What's going to happen to the senior management team when I go to the private equity house and say this whole thing has gone wrong? There are the costs of fixing are just astronomical. The hidden costs of fixing. Don't try and kid yourselves about the upfront costs. Oh, well, that'll cost tens of thousands of dollars to fix. The costs on the staff, the morale, the management team, if you get it wrong, are astronomical. So just do everything you can to make sure you get it right, and just don't kid yourselves by saving a nickel and diming here and there, because it will bite you in a way which, well, actually, you probably won't know about because you'll be booted out, I suspect.
Yeah, that's unfortunately you're right on that, and so much of what you're talking about here, I was jotting down some notes as you were talking. You mentioned governance, preparation, setting up a program management office, bringing in the right outside help, negotiations, etc. So much of what you've talked about and what you alluded to is the upfront piece of it, the stuff you do before the project really gets started. And what's interesting is that you were under fairly immense time pressure to stand this up. And I know a lot of organizations, a lot of clients we work with are under similar types of pressure, maybe for different reasons. Maybe there's economic conditions or a merger that's happened or whatever the case may be that is causing some sort of urgency. And then you add to that the whole agile movement and the need or the want that organizations have to be more nimble and move faster. So there's a lot of headwinds that would suggest that maybe you don't take that time up front because you're spending time up front planning and preparing when you could be doing. And so I think it's very interesting because it's almost counterintuitive but very smart to say, we're going to take a step back to be able to take 2 steps forward and to take 2 steps forward quickly. So I guess the question would be, how much of the time of the year or so that you spent on the transformation, how much of that time, just order of magnitude, did you spend on that upfront preparation and all those things you talked about?
Yeah, I think we probably spent more time preparing than we did in the actual transforming, so to speak. Yeah, no, we definitely did. We spent a lot more time preparing, getting the scope of works right, trying to understand the needs of the business fully, and absolutely scope everything out. Much more so than the data migration and should I say, towards the month or so up to the going live that was it. It was the going live data translation stage came towards the second half, or well into the second half of the project. And I think that I should say here that the thing about these projects as well, I think probably maybe more so on the finance side than on the other sides, is it's not until you actually start transforming the data into the way you want to see it and start using it that your red, amber, green start really wrapping up. Because you can get, if I was to take the old classic red, amber, green rag status for a project, don't kid yourself because you've got green, 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 green. That it's actually really when you get to the final stages of the project that you really begin to stress test it. So don't think because you're green all the way up that you're not going to face your speed bumps, your reds, your ambers towards the back end of the project. but I'd like to think you mitigate it by doing lots and lots of preparation up front, getting the scope. The systems integrators you're going to use, they're going to do what you tell them to. And we actually had a specialist, on the financial side. We had somebody there who just sat as a go-between between the company and the systems integrator to really make sure that the interpretation of what we wanted was clearly and well defined. Because the systems integrator, if you say, go left, they'll go left. If you say jump, one step forward, they'll jump one step forward. If you actually shouldn't have said go left and you should have said go right, it's not their fault. You've got to make sure you give them a really clear instruction. And you won't know that until the very end of the project. So investing up front. So I would probably say, Eric, we spent close to 2/3 of the time, should I say, doing the preparation stage before the transfer. Some of it runs in parallel, but before the transformation ETL stage, to use the lingo. So just, if you prepare it properly and you direct them properly, then you've got hopefully a half decent chance of getting it right.
Right. Well, that's fascinating because it's rare that you hear that someone, especially at your level, at a CFO level, at the C level, that recognizes that you're actually moving faster by taking that time up front to plan. I think the instinct is to just go, go, go. Let's not worry about planning. Let's go, because we've only got 12 months or whatever our timeline is. So I think that's very intuitive and rare to hear that. So that's refreshing. If you had to summarize, for those of our audience members that are on a transformation or about to start a transformation of some sort, whether it's a digital transformation or business transformation or reorg, whatever it may be, how would you summarize just the closing words of advice you'd provide to them?
Okay, a couple of thoughts on that one. Consider the cost of failure up front. Genuinely, at the board level, you should consider what will happen if it goes wrong. Because it's easy to say, oh, that's just the back office, let's let them get on with it. But just understand just what the costs are. And the costs are huge. I'm not just talking about financial costs. If it goes wrong, you need to manage the expectations of the board. I say you, I don't mean that in some sort of preferred sense. I mean, one needs to manage the expectations of the board and the company. This is not a magic wand. You're not going to suddenly find yourself way better off for doing it. It will take time. It's not something you don't go. You don't climb Everest in a day. It takes you a long time to actually see the benefits of it. So just manage the expectations of the board. You're not going to solve all your problems with one fell swoop. It will take a long time to bed in. And just because you've gone live doesn't mean to say your project's over. It's not. You're probably just starting. Getting the benefits of it is not something. It's not turning a switch on and off. All right. It will take more time. It's going to cost you more than you want, and it's going to deliver less than you want in the short term. In the long term, I'm absolutely able to deliver everything. Well, hopefully, but it'll, manage the expectations. You've got to have champions running throughout the company, because you could easily get the board or somebody on the board saying, right, this is what we've got to do. You must have the champion on the board, but you need that vein running through the company. Because if the champion at the top is not supported by the operations team, by the back office team who just say, yeah, this is the thing to do, then they're not even going to see it, because they're getting their monthly board report. They're not even going to see the resistance that you get on the ground. So you want to get literally running the whole way down. And to me, some of the most important people in the company are those at the junior end. They're the ones who deal with the actual, should I say, the workings of these ERP systems day in, day out. Listen to them, for God's sake. They're the ones who are sitting there pushing the buttons and having to manage Workday or Salesforce or Concur or SAP or NetSuite. They're the ones who are doing it. So listen to what they do. Don't think that just because you've been there, done it, and you're 30 years in the business, you know all the answers. No, we don't. It's, you know, systems are changing so rapidly and so often. There is no way we can keep up with it. So communicate and listen all the way down the organization. And final things was get independent advice. You know, this is a holistic exercise. There is no way that any individual is going to understand how all the component parts, within a company, of how all the component parts, how these ERP systems all mix together, how Salesforce works with NetSuite, but it doesn't work with Dynamics or as well, or what's going to be required as middleware. You need independent advice, because you're not going to, unless you've been doing this for as long as you guys have, it's not going to work that you're going to know the answers. Because what was yesterday's solution, or the solution 2 years ago, will have moved on. What were the terms of a contract that Microsoft were offering you or offering people 2 years ago? Now it's more cloud-based. It's not. It's going to be different. What you can get, how you knit different countries together, what all those component parts are. Don't even think that you know the answers. You don't. So, for God's sake, get independent advice, because if you get it wrong, it's going to cost you your company, your livelihood, and your job. And the very last thing I would say, and I will admit, I've nicked this from somewhere. I read this recently, and I thought this was brilliant. It says, "Be wary of the loud mouth with a strong opinion, masquerading as the expert, versus the quiet guy who spent his life researching an area." And I think that's great words, because we all know we all know who those people are, and it's easy to be bowled over by them. But just take caution, is what I would say.
Right. Well, that's great advice. I appreciate you sharing those insights, and obviously me being biased, I think one of the best decisions you made was to hire that independent outside help from our team at Third Stage. But that's me being biased, obviously there.
Yeah, it was brilliant. And in the schemes of the whole project, it was, to be fair, relatively, it was a tiny part of the cost of the whole project. But if you set off on the wrong course, at least I felt that we were setting off on the right course, and that was absolutely, it was money well worth spending, because it would be so easy to get these things wrong. So I always would countenance people to go to people who've had experience doing these things. Most people will never do this, or maybe once in their life.
Yep. And there's a lot of battle wounds and lessons to be learned after multiple times through it. Well, James, thank you very much for being here today. I really appreciate your time, and appreciate being on the show here today. I know you're on LinkedIn, so people can connect with you on LinkedIn. Any other ways that they can get a hold of you or learn more about you, or is LinkedIn the best way?
LinkedIn is the best way, because I'm just trying to rebuild our website.
There you go.
But LinkedIn is the best way.
Perfect. All right, James. Well, thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate that.